Finally getting around to making this Hornet Nationals update video. Between the weather, my birthday, and some long days at work, I've been putting this off, but finally feeling motivated to get some content recorded today. That, and we really needed to get moving on getting Alex's car fixed up from everything that happened to it, which, as you can see, we've already started on. This is my 5th Hornet Nationals and Alex's 6th Hornet Nationals. Out of all the nationals that we've participated in, Alex has only finished 2 of them. Unfortunately, his curse continued at this one. At least this time it happened without another car's assistance. But we'll get into that shortly. 29 Hornets showed up on Saturday. So we were already set up to run 3 heats and a B main. Pretty sure that's been the highest compact car count I've seen at the track in years. Right off the rip, I could see that the track looked great. I was told that the usual track guy, the track prep guy, wasn't there that week, so they worked the track a little bit differently, and it was definitely evident. It was the smoothest it's been all season by a long shot. Unfortunately, that meant it got black slick pretty quickly, and I always do terrible in those conditions. We went out for qualifiers, and my car was pushing like a dump truck. I couldn't even use more than like half throttle in the corners, and it was evident with a 7th fastest qualifying time. I was about half a second slower than the fastest qualifying time though, so it wasn't horrific. We went back to the pits after the qualifiers and made some changes on both cars to loosen them up a little bit for the heats. I ended up increasing the rear tire stagger on both cars and made some tire pressure adjustments. We didn't have a whole lot of time between the qualifiers and our heats, as we were the first heat races up. I was starting front row outside of heat number 1 next to Josh Lanehart. We took off and I made it out front, but exited turn 2 too high and slowed down a lot. Cordell was on my tail pretty much immediately after that and drove past me on the bottom of turn 2 on the next lap. He ended up putting about a straightaway gap on me before we had a yellow for a spin out. We ended up going green again, and I stayed with him for a lap or 2, trying to run the low line, but just did not have the corner exit speed. My car definitely felt a lot better than it did in the qualifiers, and the track was nice. I ended up finishing 2nd place. Heat 2 was pretty good. Lucas Walters led every lap of that one. Landon went from 5th to 2nd place by the flag stand, and he pretty much held that spot until just before the white flag when Pollitt snuck past him on the bottom side. He was really starting to close the gap on Lucas after that pass too. Bet it would have been a much closer race if he had another 2 laps or so. Alex was set to start on the pole of heat number 3. Unfortunately, he never made it out. His car was acting crazy in the lineup chute just before he was supposed to roll out. His temperature gauge was showing like 270 degrees, and his oil pressure was at 0. Then it quit running, and then it wouldn't restart. He ended up getting pushed back to the trailer. Jack Flume won that heat with another white flag lap pass, like just before the white flag lap, after Shannon led pretty much the whole thing from the beginning. Got back to the trailer after my heat, and it didn't take us long to figure out that Alex's alternator had ended up dying. Which is this one. I haven't opened it up yet to look at it, but I'm pretty sure the voltage regulator shot. Alex had forgot to turn off his fan the previous race, the race from the week before, after his heat race. And his battery was dead when he went to go out for the feature. He jumped the car and it ran fine for the feature with no problems, but we think that may have been what helped kill that alternator. We got another alternator swapped in, and Alex made it out to the B main, which he was starting 12th. This B main was coming after the Hornet heat races, the midgets, the mods, and the pure stocks. So the track had slicked off a lot more since our heat races, especially up on the high line. It was also super dusty. Alex's car was just covered in dust after that race. In that B main, The green flag dropped, and it looked like a lot of cars started washing up towards the wall, Alex included. And he went into one, he ended up pushing up real far. Natalie got squirrely on the backstretch and then just carried it in a turn 3 where her car ended up skating up towards the wall. Once she hit that soft stuff at the top, it just yanked her car to the right and she whacked the wall pretty good. Luckily, she was all right, and I'm pretty sure that Randy already has her car all fixed up. They did a complete restart since they didn't even complete one lap. Everyone made it through turns 1 and 2. Then it looked like Billy came down on Jesse's front end, and they both ended up spinning into the infield. That one looked pretty scary from the stands. I'm pretty sure I saw air underneath Billy's car when he was sliding sideways through the infield. They both kept it together though, and rejoined the field from the tail. Attempt number 3 at starting the B main went a little bit better, even though the field wasn't really bunched up when they went green. After one lap, Billy drove from the tail all the way to third, with Alex pretty much right behind him. They did a few laps before a car ended up losing a wheel, and that caused a yellow. At that point, the track officials had decided to shorten the B main from 12 laps to 5 laps due to time constraints. They lined back up and they called the green and white flags, which I thought meant 1 lap to go. They came to the line and Billy shot out front, and there was all sorts of beating and banging going on behind him between Sean Moore and that number 3 car. The field came around one more time and they waved the white flag, which was a little confusing. Alex ended up lifting in turns 1 and 2 thinking they were done, but got back in the throttle after realizing there was another lap for some reason. Luckily, he was already in the transfer spot and he finished 4th. After that B main, they started watering the track, and the track was definitely rubbered up at this point, but the dust was just insane. They watered the top side pretty good, where the dust was the worst. I know their intentions with watering were to control the dust and then to provide another lane to race in, as most of the cars had created kind of a single line near the bottom at that point. The only problem here was we were the first feature up after they watered the track, and our cars aren't the best for blowing the top layer off the track, and I was afraid it was going to be crazy slick out there, and I was spot on with that assessment. I was in the redraw, and I ended up getting a 2, which had me starting up front next to Jack Flume. After doing a parade lap, I very quickly realized that I should have changed the rear stagger back on my car. My car was extremely loose. They had us spin our tires up in turns 3 and 4 to try and blow the slime off the top of the track, but I don't think it helped very much. They called 1 to go on the radio, and we started to bunch up, but Jack seemed to want to start the race at Mach 3. I was trying to catch up still as we came to the line, and my car started sliding going into turn 4. I mean, it was wild. The race director ended up calling yellow and yelled at us, so we tried it again. I was still behind by about a car length when we ended up hitting that stripe the second time, but they just stayed green. I ended up going way too high exiting turn 2 and fishtailed a bit coming out and nearly kissed the wall. Came off that throttle to try and keep the car together. Ended up falling back to 4th. Made it to turn 3, and then my car just rotates left hard. I mean, just facing the infield. I already knew it was going to be a nightmare keeping that car together for the rest of the race. I barely made it out of turn 4 without hitting anything. Cordell tail whipped the wall, exiting turn 4 just past the entrance chute, and from what I heard, it cracked the rear axle of his car damn near in half. I can't believe he was able to wheel that thing to a win after that hit. After I got my car back in shape after leaving turn 4 all stupid, I threw it on the bottom side, then they threw a yellow. I missed what happened, but it looked like Brian Farmer's bumper got tore off. After the yellow was thrown, Tristan ended up hitting the wall in turn 1. We lined up to go green again, and I was starting 5th. I heard a car get on the throttle as we came to the line, so I went for it. And it ended up being someone else around me that was on the throttle and not the leader. So I ended up getting called for a jump. I think it was barely a jump, but I did gain a position because of it, so the penalty did make sense. We made it around to turn 3, and Lucas Walters got up in the slime. He went all the way to the wall, completely sideways, but somehow saved it, and we stayed green. I found myself in 3rd place at this point. We came around to turn 4 again, and this time the slime got Josh Lanehart. He also saved it from kissing the wall and stayed in the throttle. Lucas went high going into turn 1 and nearly found the wall again on that same lap. I wasn't kidding when I said it was slippery out there. I ended up holding 3rd place for several laps, not too far behind Jack and Cordell when we ended up going yellow again. I came around to turn 3 and then I saw Alex facing the wrong way. He had come out of turn 2 a little higher than he had been in the previous laps, and his right front found the slime. His RPM jumped up a little bit, and his car pushed up into the wall. He tagged the right rear first, and the front just barely kissed the concrete. He stayed in the throttle, but the rear end was bent pretty bad. He made it down the backstretch, but all the rear steer made his car loop going into turn 3. That ended his night. You can see just how much rear steer he had. It's supposed to be straight, like that side. They lined us up again, and they penalized me the 2 positions for the jump earlier. We went green, and that's when the single file racing started. We started doing more banging than Stevie Wonder's toes going into the corners. I was hard on the brakes trying to stay on the bottom and ended up getting hit in the rear a bunch of times. I knew it was going to happen with how much I had to slow down to stay in shape. We stacked up several times in the bottom of 2, all hitting bumpers. Brian gave me a pretty good bop going into turn 1 one time, which pushed me up in the landing, which knocked him out of shape. And going into turn 2, I managed to slip by him on the bottom side, then immediately got sideways in turn 3 and bunched us all right back up again. By that point, Lucas had caught back up and was hot on my heels. Yet again, I left turn 2 way high and slowed down a ton, and Lucas was just glued to my bumper at that point. The next lap was the white flag lap. Lucas got up underneath me on the backstretch. We raced going into turn 3. I went high going into the top of 4 and got into the slime and started sliding sideways. But I just stayed pinned to the floor on the throttle and drag raced him to the checkers. Brian was right behind us. I ended up finishing 5th, which was 0.084 of a second behind Lucas and 0.208 in front of Brian. It was a pretty close finish, and I knew for sure those guys were going to be a lot faster than I in the corners, just because my setup was not there. I mean, it goes to show that track conditions really can affect the outcome of a race if a car is or isn't prepared for it. And so far this season, my car has done pretty well with the track conditions that we've been given. But now that we've experienced true black slick on that track, which we haven't probably in a while, I mean, that was just hard for me to handle. It goes a lot to my driving style, which we all know is just keep it pinned to the floor. And it does really good for me in the straights. I definitely have acceleration for all these guys on starts and restarts, but that's pretty much the only consistent thing I can offer because my corners are pretty much unpredictable. One of these days I'll calm down and learn how to drive a little bit smoother. I'm not entirely sure it all has to do with my setup because I've been getting a lot of advice about that, and it definitely made the car handle better, but I am still learning about what changes to make in which circumstances to make these things handle better. And I was happy with what we did to loosen them up to make them stop pushing, but Obviously, my car still needs a little bit more work to make it stable in the corners. I've already started stripping an axle here to put back in Alex's car, and I'll have to get it cleaned up here and then weld up these hub flanges. They only weld little spots from the factory, and I'll fully weld them all the way around. I'll show that process. Obviously, the axle in Alex's car didn't split there, it just bent here. And there's a lot of guys that will run a tube between here and here to keep these axles from bending in like this. And we haven't done that yet because the tech guy from last year didn't like that. He considered it a reinforcement that was against the rules, so we never did anything with it. But there have been guys running it this year, so I think we're going to try that on this axle once I score a piece of 1-inch tubed weld in here. But we'll get that thing together back in Alex's car. You can see where he just kissed the wall. It buckled the quarter in here a little bit. A little scuff on the bumper. And when the front came and just barely licked the wall, I mean, it shaved a part of the fender that stuck out already. And then you can see the edge of the bead lock actually hit. So I'm gonna make sure that wheel ain't bent. Make sure the cords in that tire aren't busted. This strut ended up getting pushed up against the inner body structure here. It shaved a bunch of paint off. So I'm probably gonna pull that out too and make sure that it looks good. That's pretty much all we gotta do to his car. Really nothing happened to mine. It got bopped in the back end, but that really didn't affect anything. I think I did get hit hard enough that it actually buckled here, but that's still pretty inconsequential. But yeah, we still got 2 cars. Didn't junk anything, so I'll take it. After all that, I'm still 180 points, I think, behind Cordell, and 315 ahead of Landon. Anything could still happen. We have one more race left, which is actually this coming Saturday. And that is our Night of Champions. So I'll make sure both of these things are ready to go and hope for the best during that race. All right, I'll get this car fixed up, and we'll see you guys in the next video.
Lots of folks came by.